Good morning, I'm Nicholas Simoes Da Silva and I'm a student at the ANU College of Law and I study law, a Bachelor of Laws in International Relations. And I'm joined this morning for Ask an Academic with Anne McNaughton, a senior lecturer in the College of Law and an adjunct at the ANU Centre for European Studies, where we are today. Welcome, Anne.
Thanks very much, Nicholas. Thanks for speaking with me today. I'm looking forward to doing this.
Thanks for coming. I just wanted to start by asking you about what brought you to law and what made you interested in the law as a career.
It's hard to pinpoint a precise time, but I can remember very clearly when I was in high school I won a scholarship for the Society from Australia-German Student Exchange, and it's a deliberate little plug there because the Society still goes on and offers scholarships for students to spend 3 months in Germany. My scholarship was sponsored by the German-Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and when I came back my father took me to say thank you to the director. And it was at that point we were talking about politics and international relations, and there was something that indicated to me that there was an underpinning, something underneath the politics and the policy, which was law. So, and the director at the time was also a lawyer, as so many Germans are. It was really that. So this idea of combining languages and law in some way, and it started really when I was in high school.
And so you took that time in Germany, spending the 3 months there, and then what did you do after that?
Well, then was finish the high school certificate, as it was, I think it still is. And at that time, I grew up in Newcastle, up just north of Sydney, and there was no law school at Newcastle at the time. And one of the information sessions at the university, we still have them, the university had, was explaining the relationship between separate degrees and double degrees. So I wanted to study languages, so I chose to stay home and to do my arts degree in Newcastle. And then I was fortunate enough after that to qualify for the graduate law program at UNSW. And so I then moved to Sydney after that and did my law degree at UNSW.
And then you went back to Germany and did your master's?
Yes, I was fortunate to win a German academic exchange scholarship for a winter course while I was doing my arts degree, just at the end of it. And then at the end of my law degree, again I won a German academic exchange service scholarship to fund a position in a newly developed, at that stage, these masters for international students and for graduates from other disciplines or other jurisdictions was really just developing. So I did my Master of Laws at Tübingen University in Germany. Yeah.
And was that a shock to move from an Australian system, common law, to a civil law jurisdiction?
It was certainly different, and it was interesting trying to understand the approximation. So as foreign law graduates, we had to choose one of the streams of either civil, criminal or public law. But then we could choose any electives that we wanted to do. So I was doing commercial subjects and civil law and also European law. And just the idea of going through these lecture theatres that had been visited and been where students for centuries, the same now, I mean, your experience in France as well, this idea that these buildings have been there for centuries, or a couple anyway. Yeah, it was very interesting, and seeing how the different ways of learning. But looking back, it actually was not that different to what we had been doing ourselves. Okay. Yeah.
And was it then that you realised you wanted to go into academia?
No, not at all. I was actually had a position at a law firm in Sydney, in a commercial division of a law firm in Sydney. And I was going to go back, and indeed I did, when I'd finished my master's. So I did my master's, and on the pretext that it would improve my other skills, I did an immersion course in Villefranche, in French, for a month, and a bit of travelling, and then went back to the firm, and was there for just over about 2.5 years. So I was invited to set up the undergraduate course in EU law at UNSW. I contacted the head of school and offered to do a class, and he said, well, why don't you set up the program, the course. And so I was doing that a couple of times a week on top of working both in Sydney, and then I was seconded to Newcastle for a bit. And I worked out I could either have a career in the profession, in the practice, or as an academic, but not both. I'm not one of those people who can happily bridge the two. And then I was fortunate that a position came up in the business school at UNSW, it's in the Commerce faculty at the time, and it was called the School of Business Law and Taxation. And that's where I started. So I took the position there and doing contract and commercial transactions, international commercial transactions. Yeah.
And you've been teaching since?
Yes, yes.
So
Yeah.
what is it that's attracted you? What have you most enjoyed about teaching?
I think the most rewarding aspect and the thing I enjoy most is when there's a transformational occurrence, and often you cannot be expecting it, but when students, you can see that students have learnt something or realised something or something's become clear in ways that were not previously the case. And so that, recognising that aha experience in somebody else is terrific. That's just really marvellous. Having the sorts of inquiries when people are developing their own autonomy and their own questions, and in a sense being able to step back and learn from them when they're doing their work, whether that's undergraduate or at the graduate level. And then the idea that somehow we're supporting and helping people to become confident, autonomous, self-reliant learners in a context which, we talk about lifelong learning now. It's part of EU policy, Australian government policy, and it can be bandied around a bit, but if we're going to be lifelong learners, we have to develop a lot of skills that we don't learn in the classroom. Resilience and self-reliance, and a capacity to discern and disseminate as well. So they're the sorts of things that I really enjoy. And on occasion in my summer school, for my EU course just passed, in light of Brexit and a couple of other developments, I had my soapbox out, which I don't often do. And that was, a number of students really enjoyed that. So that was actually fun to stop being so restrained and measured and objective and just, be really polemic.
Academics are allowed opinions.
Yes, that's right. Exactly right. Yeah, that was lots of fun.
And the European Union has been one of your primary research interests. And I wonder what brought you to the European Union and has sustained that interest.
And that, I think, reflecting on that, because a few people have asked me, it came up in an international trade law course I did in my undergraduate studies. And so when I got the opportunity to go to Germany, we had to do a thesis. And I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to find out about this thing called the European Economic Community. And I wrote my thesis on the incorporation of the territory of what had been East Germany. As a consequence of reunification of Germany, there were issues about transitioning that territory of Germany, which suddenly became part of the European Economic Community. And yet, in theory, if the measures had remained as they were, Germany would have been breaching a whole host of EU measures, what now we would now call EU measures. So I did my thesis on that, and when I came back, as I said, Professor Tilbury invited me to set up the undergraduate course at UNSW, and then a little while later I was invited by Sydney University to teach courses on EU law in their master's program, which I did from 1996 until about 2011 or 12, I think. And then I've also been able to teach, I had the opportunity to teach law and politics of EU integration at the undergraduate level, most recently here now at ANU. So I've kept that going, and it's a fascinating legal entity and legal system. And as one of Australia's most significant, not only most significant trading blocs, but sources of the majority of our population, and one of our most closely related cultural, historical entities, for want of a better word. And then, of course, now, at the minute, with Brexit and now the free trade agreement in the offing, and also the heightened awareness of the EU's interest in this region of the world, So the EU is really important geopolitically to balance out areas that are not as stable as they might otherwise be, and now it will be polemic, to balance out the aspirations of certain states and certain blocs internationally, which don't necessarily accord with what we would understand to be appropriate and representative of human rights, a liberal democratic tradition, inclusiveness, tolerance, transparency, accountability. So the EU, even though it has its faults, so there's always room for improvement, as a construct fundamentally based on the rule of law, and in fact a creation of law, is the quintessential laboratory for a lawyer, I think.
Mm. It has been fascinating to study that, the European Union as an entity. But I wonder, what are some of the projects that you're working on at the moment, some of your research interests that you're currently focused on in the coming months and years?
Well, in terms of the years, it will continue to be EU-Australia relations. Most specifically at the minute, I've got a few promised publications, which will be done and submitted as they should be, but they're looking at, one of them's looking at comparisons of the legal structure of Australia and the EU for the purposes of an edited collection of Australian and related EU studies people. One that I'm working on at the minute, which I'm really passionate about, is looking at legal transplants in Oceania and looking at certain concepts that developed in the EU legal system and how they have translated and been transplanted in the international context. And I'm finding that really exciting to work on at the minute. And then there are other little projects. I'm involved assisting with a special interest group on global private law for the European Law Institute. And we've got a couple of ideas that are developing there, which is encouraging. And working with a colleague, Dr. Petra Butler, she's a professor at Victoria University in Wellington. And we're looking at access to justice for small and medium-sized enterprises in international commercial contracts. So comparative work there in that space. So I feel like I can finally justify calling myself a comparative lawyer, looking at EU and Australia and the developments. Legal consequences of economic integration might be one way of referring to it. Mm. So they're the sorts of things that I'm working on at the minute, apart from everything else that we always have to do. So I'm looking forward to keeping on doing that for some time to come.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for joining me today, and stay tuned for further of these talks in the coming months and weeks. So thanks again, Anne.
And thank you, Nicholas, for coming and talking with me and for sharing also the interest of EU. I really appreciate it.